Imagine you're building this state-of-the-art economic engine. You spend, I don't know, 3 straight decades just pouring resources into it.
Right. Massive investment.
Exactly. You optimize all the hardware so it runs cleaner than like almost anything else out there on the global market.
Hmm.
And you fine-tune the maintenance so this engine actually lasts 13 years longer than the old model used to.
Sounds like an absolute marvel of modern engineering, honestly.
It is. It really is. But then, right as you are, ready to hit maximum velocity and take on the world, you make this truly bizarre, almost unthinkable management decision.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. You voluntarily lock 80% of your workforce out of the factory. You just, you leave the machine sitting there, turned off, gathering dust.
It sounds completely irrational when you frame it that way. You would never engineer a system with that much potential only to throttle it on purpose.
Right.
But that is exactly what we are looking at today. It is this structural paradox that is literally dictating the future of millions of people.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. You, our listener, sent us this massive and frankly kind of intimidating stack of data sets, and you asked us to make sense of it for you.
It was a lot of spreadsheets.
So many spreadsheets. We are looking at a comprehensive 30-year autopsy of the Kingdom of Morocco's human development and gender equality, tracking everything from 1990 all the way to 2023.
And as we dug through all this data for you, one specific contradiction just kept jumping off the page. It's the ultimate tension between ecological growth and social equity.
Yeah, that tension is wild.
Because if you look purely at how Morocco treats the earth, like their ecological footprint, they are performing at a level that puts, honestly, much of the developed world to shame.
Oh, absolutely. I want to hit them with this right up front. When it comes to protecting the planet, Morocco's global performance actually outpaces its basic human development rank by a staggering 39 places.
39 places. That isn't a statistical margin of error. That is, well, it's two completely different realities existing in the exact same country.
Right. You have this quiet global powerhouse on the environmental front, but then their overall human development ranking is being stubbornly dragged down. It's hitting this, structural ceiling.
And as you asked in your notes to us, can the sheer quality of that green ecological growth somehow make up for a fundamental lack of social equity?
And the short answer, hidden in your data, is no. It really cannot.
No, it can't, because that social ceiling isn't made of, abstract economic theory. It is a very real, measurable demographic divide.
But to understand why Morocco is stuck, we first have to understand the momentum they've built, right? And exactly where that momentum crashes into reality.
Right. We can't just talk about the wall they are hitting without understanding how fast they are driving.
Exactly. And the narrative hidden in this 30-year data set, it is not a story of stagnation. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Let's look at the climb.
The climb is impressive.
It really is.
Yeah.
When we mapped out your data on a radar chart for 2023, tracking all the major global metrics side by side, it paints a picture of a country in the middle of this grueling, steep ascent.
But it's a massive transition phase. If we look at the baseline metric first, the Standard Human Development Index, the HDI,
which measures a long and healthy life,
yeah,
access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living, right?
Exactly. Morocco sits at 0.710 for the year 2023, and globally, that ranks them 120th.
Okay, which puts them in the medium-high human development category. But that number, that 0.710, it doesn't really mean much to you unless we look at where they started.
Right, context is everything.
Because in 1990, Morocco's score was a mere 0.451, and the global average back then was 0.60. They weren't just behind the curve.
No, they were trailing significantly. A score of 0.451 in 1990, that reflects a reality of very low life expectancy, pretty fragile educational infrastructure, and widespread poverty.
It was a tough starting line.
The distance between 0.451 and the global average was a chasm. But over the last 3 decades, they didn't just slowly tick upward. They sprinted.
It really did.
By 2023, while the global average moved up to 0.756, Morocco reached that 0.710.
Meaning they successfully closed the gap with the world average by about 44%.
44%, that is huge.
Nearly half the distance just erased in a single generation.
Now, looking at the trend line you provided, there is this really obvious hiccup around 2020 and 2021 where the growth just, it flatlines.
Yeah, that is the COVID-19 pandemic,
right,
which, acted as a massive macro-environmental shock across basically every data set globally.
Everyone took a hit there.
Right. But what matters for Morocco's specific narrative is the elasticity shown immediately after. By 2022 and 2023, the trajectory didn't just recover, it rebounded back into robust growth.
So the engine didn't break. It just stalled briefly and restarted.
So knowing that the engine is running hot and they've closed this gap by 44%, I really wanted to find the primary fuel source. Like, what is the single biggest victory in these 30 years?
And when you isolate the variables in your data set, it is undeniably public health.
Yeah, the health data isn't just a victory. It's a profound transformation of the human experience in Morocco. Look at the raw numbers.
They're pretty staggering.
In 1990, the life expectancy at birth in Morocco was 62.4 years. But by 2023, that jumps to 75.3 years.
That is an addition of 12.9 years of life per person.
Just think about that. Gaining nearly 13 years of life expectancy in just 3 decades. You don't get those numbers just by, I don't know, building a few nice hospitals in the capital.
Oh, definitely not. It requires entirely rewiring how a country operates.
Exactly. I was trying to visualize what actually causes a 13-year jump across an entire population. It means they had to push medical infrastructure way out into the rural areas, like into the Atlas Mountains.
Right. It means paved roads that allow ambulances to function.
Yes. And it means establishing cold chain logistics so that childhood vaccines don't spoil before they reach a remote village.
It is the eradication of preventable early death. You have better sanitation, which drops the mortality rate from waterborne diseases. You have widespread childhood vaccination programs. You have basic, accessible antibiotics.
But the real triumph here, the actual mechanism that creates that 75.3 number, is that they didn't just catch up to the rest of the world.
Right. This is the first mind-bending stat from your sources. The global average life expectancy in 2023 sits at 73.4 years.
And Morocco is at 75.3.
They actually blew past the global average by almost 2 full years.
Which completely alters the psychology and the economic horizon of the nation, right?
Completely. When your population expects to live to 75 instead of 62, behavior changes fundamentally. Families invest differently.
How so?
Well, if you think you are only going to live to your early 60s, your economic timeline is heavily compressed. You need your children working earlier. You need income immediately.
Ah, I see.
But if you have an extra decade and a half, you can afford to keep your kids in school longer. You can plan for generational wealth transfer.
And it means the community retains its elders. You have an extra decade of experienced workers, leaders, and grandparents who can, provide childcare, which theoretically frees up the parents to work.
Exactly. It is a compounding social benefit.
But this is exactly where the data in your stack takes a sharp, highly problematic turn.
Yeah, the paradox kicks in.
Because if Moroccans are living longer, healthier lives than the global average, you would assume their overall human development rank would be skyrocketing. But they are still ranked 120th. Why?
Because living a long time is only the prerequisite for human development. It's the foundation, not the house. To understand why they're stuck at 120th, we have to move out of the rural clinics and step into the classrooms.
Right.
We have to look at the education bottleneck.
Let's follow that thread. Because when you first glance at the education data you provided, it actually looks like another massive win.
On paper, yeah.
The sources use a metric called expected years of schooling. And just to clarify, this isn't how long people actually did go to school. It's a projection.
Right. It's how many years a child entering the school system today can expect to receive based on current enrollment rates.
In 1990, that number in Morocco was a pretty dismal 6.4 years.
Which is barely enough to get through primary school.
Right. But by 2023, the expected years of schooling more than doubled to 15.1 years.
That's a huge leap.
And to give you the baseline, the global average is only 13.0 years. So they went from 6.4 to 15.1. They're building an expectation that kids will stay in school 2 years longer than the global average.
Which should be a compounding economic miracle.
It really should be. So what's the catch?
Well, expected years of schooling is essentially a measurement of the government's infrastructure and initial enrollment. It tells you that the state built the desks, hired the teachers, and got the 6-year-olds through the front door.
It measures the promise of the system.
Exactly. It measures the promise, which implies the promise is being broken somewhere down the line.
Oh, wow. Where do we see that?
We see the broken promise in the companion metric.
Yeah.
The mean years of schooling, this is the harsh reality check.
What does that measure?
It measures the actual historical average number of years of education received by the adult population, ages 25 and older. So if the expectation for a child today is 15.1 years, what is the reality of the adults walking around right now?
And the reality, according to your data, is only 6.2 years.
6.2? That is a devastating gap.
So the system is built to offer 15 years. But historically, the average adult walked away after 6. Why? What is the mechanism driving a kid out of the classroom after year 6?
It points to intense systemic friction. Year 6 is roughly the end of primary school and the transition to middle school.
Okay.
In a developing economy with a large rural population like Morocco's, that transition is perilous.
Because of distance?
Distance is a huge factor. The primary school might be right in your village, but the middle school might be 5 miles away. If there's no safe, reliable transportation, the friction to attend becomes too high. And then you add economic pressure to that. Like, if you are a family living in a rural area and your child is 12 years old, they are physically capable of agricultural labor.
Right, they can work.
So the opportunity cost of sending them to a school 5 miles away, rather than having them work the farm or enter the informal economy, I mean, that is a math equation that poorer families are forced to calculate every single day.
Exactly. But the dropout rate isn't happening because people don't value education. It happens because the immediate economic survival of the family often outweighs the delayed gratification of a diploma.
So the government has created the capacity for 15 years, but they haven't solved the socioeconomic friction that forces a student to abandon that capacity at year 6.
And if you are abandoning education at year 6, you aren't acquiring the complex skills needed for a modern, high-earning economy.
Which leads us perfectly into the income data.
Yeah.
We know education is supposed to be the engine of wealth. If the engine is leaking students, what happens to the money?
Well, we look at the gross national income, the GNI per capita. In 1990, it was $4,255. By 2023, it grew to $8,653.
So 103% increase. They basically doubled their national wealth per person.
Yes, but context is everything here. The global average GNI per capita in 2023 is $20,327.
Oh, wow.
Morocco is less than half the global average.
Okay, let me synthesize this, because this is where the data tells a really uncomfortable story. The expected years of schooling went up by over 130%. The life expectancy went up by nearly 13 years. But the wealth only went up by 103%.
Right.
It seems like they're pouring all this time and health into the population, but the population isn't able to turn that into proportional wealth.
You've just diagnosed the skill conversion rate problem. Wealth is growing, but it is growing slower than the years people are supposedly spending in the educational pipeline.
So the economy just isn't absorbing them.
The Moroccan economy is fundamentally struggling to turn an increasingly educated populace into high-earning workers.
Why is that happening? Let's say a student actually survives the friction.
Yeah.
They stay in school, they get the 15 years of education, they get a university degree. Why aren't they getting rich?
Because of a mismatch between the academy and the market.
What do you mean?
Well, you can have a brilliant student graduate with a degree in literature or theoretical sociology, but if the local economy is structurally built on agriculture, tourism, and lower-tier manufacturing, there is literally nowhere for that degree to land.
I see.
The economy isn't generating the high-skilled, high-paying knowledge worker jobs at the same rate the universities are pumping out graduates. So you end up with highly educated people forced to take jobs that don't require their level of schooling, or worse, they remain unemployed.
The education doesn't translate into earning power because the receptacle for those skills just doesn't exist yet.
Exactly.
And this friction we are talking about, the kids dropping out at year 6, the graduates who can't find jobs, this isn't happening equally to everyone. This brings us to a really fascinating but painful metric in your sources.
The inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
Yes.
This is a vital metric because an average number is an excellent place to hide.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about it. If we have 10 people in a room and one person has $1 million while the other 9 have 0, the average wealth in the room is $100,000. The average looks great.
But the reality is that 90% of the room is totally broke.
Precisely. The IHDI strips away the illusion of the average by penalizing the score based on how unequally those achievements are distributed.
And when you apply that penalty to Morocco's HDI of 0.710, the score just plummets. It drops all the way down to 0.517.
That drop represents a total loss rate of 27.2% of their development progress.
Over a quarter of their progress just erased. And if we look at the global baseline, the average worldwide loss due to inequality is 22.0%.
So Morocco is actively losing significantly more of its progress to inequality than the rest of the world.
But here is the critical detail. Where is that loss actually coming from? Because it's not primarily health. It's not even income.
No, the highest loss due to inequality is in the education sector. It is a staggering 41.9% loss.
41.9%. Nearly half the value of their educational progress is destroyed by unequal distribution.
Which confirms exactly what we were just deducing about the friction of dropping out. That massive inequality loss tells us that education in Morocco is incredibly stratified.
Right, you have the urban centers versus the rural areas.
Yes. You likely have affluent families in urban centers like Casablanca or Rabat whose children are gliding through those 15 expected years, getting premium educations and stepping into whatever high-paying roles exist.
But a massive, massive portion of the population, likely rural, likely lower income, is hitting that friction at year 6, dropping out, and violently dragging the national average down.
Exactly.
So we have this complex, fractured foundation. We have a population that is living longer than the global average, getting richer but nowhere near rich enough, and struggling with an education system that is bleeding value due to deep inequality.
It's a tough situation.
But if we want to truly understand how that inequality functions, we have to look at the sharpest dividing line in the society. We have to finally talk about the factory running at 20% capacity. We have to talk about gender.
Yes. The gender abyss. This is the absolute core of the paradox you asked us to investigate. Everything we have discussed so far, the health, the schooling, the income, behaves entirely differently depending on whether you're born male or female in Morocco.
Now, before we get into the abyss, the data does show us that things are not universally bleak for women. There have been some massive, highly commendable institutional breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
If you look at the Gender Inequality Index, the GII, which measures reproductive health alongside empowerment, and the labor market, there is a clear victory in keeping women alive.
The healthcare victories we discussed earlier apply intensely here. In 1990, the maternal mortality ratio, which is the number of mothers dying per 100,000 live births, was 460.8.
Let's pause on that. Almost 500 women dying for every 100,000 births. That is a systemic failure of care.
It was an absolute crisis. But by 2023, through those targeted healthcare policies, midwife training, rural clinical access, better emergency obstetric care, that number plummeted to 71.9.
That is an astonishing drop.
It really is.
And similarly, the adolescent birth rate births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19 fell from 45.3 down to 25.1, so drastically fewer teenage pregnancies and vastly safer childbirth.
Because of these specific targeted medical victories, Morocco's overall gender inequality index score is 0.438. And here is a rare moment where they beat the curve.
Oh, right.
That score is actually better than the global average of 0.455.
It proves that when the Moroccan institutions focus on a singular biological crisis like maternal death, they have the competence to solve it. They can build the infrastructure to keep women healthy and alive.
But keeping someone alive is just the baseline. What happens when that healthy, potentially educated woman tries to participate in the economy?
Yeah, this is where your data hits us with the most shocking statistic of the entire report.
We look at the labor market participation rate for 2023. For men, the participation rate is 69.6%. A fairly standard, robust majority of adult men are in the workforce.
But the female labor force participation rate is a mere 19.8%.
19.8%.
That is the factory running at 20% capacity. Let's compare that globally. The world average for female workforce participation is 48.5%.
Right.
Nearly half the women on Earth are participating in the formal economy. In Morocco, it is less than 1 in 5.
Think about the staggering inefficiency of this. We just talked about how expected years of schooling for girls has skyrocketed. Young women are spending a decade or more in the classroom. The state is investing capital to educate them. Families are sacrificing to keep them in school. And yet, when they graduate, 80% of them simply disappear from the formal economic radar.
It is an astronomical amount of idle human potential. And I have to ask why. Because this isn't the biological issue. They fixed the maternal mortality. They are living to 75. They are going to school. Why are 80% of women not working?
Because the friction here is no longer geographical or strictly economic. It is deeply cultural and structural.
How so?
You have deeply entrenched patriarchal norms where a woman's primary expected role, regardless of her education, is the management of the household and the raising of children.
So even if she has that literature or engineering degree we talked about, the societal expectation is that once she marries, she exits the workforce.
Exactly. And the structural barriers reinforce the cultural ones. If there is a lack of affordable, safe childcare, it makes it mathematically impossible for a mother to work if her wage doesn't cover the cost of care.
That makes sense. It's a math problem for the family.
Furthermore, the kinds of jobs available might not offer the flexibility or the safety guarantees that women require in a highly traditional society.
So Morocco is trying to climb the global economic ladder with one hand completely tied behind its back. You cannot achieve high-tier human development if half of your population is systematically excluded from wealth creation.
You really can't.
All that education just evaporates at the edge of the labor market. But what about empowerment? What about women who try to change the rules of the game from the inside?
Well, we can look at the political empowerment data, and this reveals a fascinating story of engineered growth rather than organic cultural shift.
Engineered growth.
Yeah. If you look at the share of parliament seats held by women, from 1990 all the way to 2001, it was virtually non-existent. It hovered at a tiny 0.7%.
Women were entirely absent from the legislative process. They had practically no voice in making the laws that govern them.
None. But by 2023, that number jumps to 21.4%.
That's a huge leap from less than 1%. But looking at the graph and the sources, looking at the visual data, this doesn't look like organic growth. It's not a smooth upward curve of society slowly becoming more progressive.
You're reading the shape of the data perfectly. It looks like a staircase. And that is because this growth was driven almost entirely by institutional quota policies.
The government basically forced it.
Yes. They implemented legal quotas in 2002, and you see a sharp vertical jump on the graph. They expanded those quotas in 2011, another jump, again in 2015, and again in 2021.
So it's step-like growth.
Exactly. This step-like growth proves that the state recognizes the necessity of female leadership, but it also proves that without legal mandates, the underlying cultural barriers to women's leadership remain incredibly rigid.
And even with the government artificially forcing the issue with quotas, the 21.4% female representation in parliament still lags behind the world average of 26.5%.
Which brings us to the financial reality of this entire gender divide. When you combine the lack of political power with an 80% absence from the workforce, you get the ultimate imbalance.
What does that look like?
We look at the Gender Development Index, the GDI. This index measures the gender gap in human development achievements.
And Morocco is placed in Group 5. According to the methodology notes here, Group 5 represents countries with the absolute lowest levels of gender equality in the world.
The human development gap is stark. The female HDI in Morocco is a 0.642, while the male HDI is 0.748. But the number that truly crystallizes the inequality, the number that shows you what the glass wall looks like in dollars and cents, is the income ratio.
Yeah, this is the hardest metric to swallow in the entire data set.
Yeah.
The estimated gross national income per capita for a woman in Morocco is $3,221. For a man, it is $13,990.
That is an income ratio between genders of roughly 1 to 4.3. For every single dollar a woman earns, on average, a man earns over $4.
But let's clarify the mechanism there, because it's important. This isn't just saying a woman and a man do the exact same job sitting at the exact same desk and she gets paid 75% less.
No. Wage discrimination certainly exists, but this massive 1 to 4.3 ratio is heavily driven by the labor force participation rate.
Right.
When 80% of women are generating zero formal income because they are culturally or structurally locked out of the labor market, the mathematical average of female income just plummets.
It dilutes the entire pool.
Exactly. This is the financial reality of the glass wall. Women in Morocco are healthier than ever. They're spending more years in school than ever. But they hold only a tiny fraction of the economic power.
It's a heavy, frustrating realization.
Yeah.
We have this soaring health data, this struggling, unequal education system, and this massive, suffocating gender abyss that keeps the economy running at a fraction of its potential.
Yeah.
If the data set ended here, it would be a standard, somewhat depressing story of a developing nation struggling with traditional norms. But this is where the deep dive gets genuinely surprising.
They pivot.
Because your sources pivot. While this gender wall is holding Morocco back socially and economically, the data reveals a completely different arena where Morocco is actually a quiet, unassuming global pioneer.
This is where we transition from the social deficit to the ecological surplus. We need to look at the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, or the PHDI.
I dropped this fact in the intro about them leaping 39 places ahead of their development rank in environmental performance. But we need to explain how this index actually works.
Right. It's not the usual metric.
Because the traditional Human Development Index, the HDI we've been talking about, essentially celebrates consumption, right?
Historically, yes. The traditional HDI rewards countries for getting richer, living longer, and building more infrastructure. But for the last 100 years, becoming a highly developed, quote-unquote, rich country meant burning a massive amount of fossil fuels and consuming a staggering amount of raw materials.
You built your high HDI score by polluting the planet. The U.S., Western Europe, parts of Asia, their wealth was built on carbon.
Exactly. So the traditional index doesn't really care if you destroy the Earth, as long as your citizens have high incomes and good schools.
Which seems like a pretty massive oversight today.
Right, and that's why the PHDI was created. It asks a different question. What if we penalize countries for the damage they do to the Earth while they get rich?
Oh, I love that.
The PHDI takes a nation's standard HDI score and adjusts it downward based on two distinct ecological pressures: their carbon dioxide emissions per capita and their material footprint per capita.
And this is where the entire global scorecard flips upside down. When you apply this ecological penalty, many of the world's richest, most developed nations plummet down the list because their wealth is entirely reliant on massive, unsustainable pollution.
But Morocco,
When you penalize the world for its carbon and material footprints, Morocco's global ranking shoots up by 19 places on the index.
19 places. It is a stunning validation of their specific development path, and the raw data proves exactly why they leapfrog so many other nations. Let's look at carbon emissions first.
Okay.
Morocco emits only 1.8 tons of CO2 per capita.
Compare that to the world average, which is 4.5 tons per capita.
Yeah.
They're emitting less than half the global average of greenhouse gases.
And it is not just about carbon in the air, it's about what they take out of the ground. Look at the material footprint.
What exactly does that measure?
This metric measures the total amount of raw materials extracted globally to meet the domestic consumption of a country. We are talking about everything from agricultural biomass to fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metallic minerals used in construction.
Morocco's material footprint is 5.8 tons per capita,
And the world average.
a massive 12.7 tons per capita.
So they're consuming less than half the physical resources of the average global citizen.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here. Is Morocco's carbon and material footprint so low simply because they are poorer? I mean, is it just that they don't have heavy industry yet? Or is this a deliberate green strategy?
It's a combination, but the deliberate strategy is undeniably there. Yes, a lower-income country naturally consumes less. However, Morocco has made massive, proactive bets on renewable energy.
Really? Like what?
They built the Noor Ouarzazate solar complex. It's one of the largest concentrated solar power plants in the entire world, right in the Sahara. They have aggressively pursued wind and solar to decouple their economic growth from fossil fuel imports.
So they are inadvertently, or perhaps very intentionally, demonstrating a prototype for a totally different kind of future. They are showing a low-carbon blueprint for development.
It's an incredible model.
Think about what we've learned. They are managing to grow their life expectancy past the global average. They are doubling their national wealth. They are keeping kids in school longer. And they're doing all of this without destroying the planet at the reckless rate of the legacy developed nations.
That is the crucial insight. They have maintained a decoupled growth trajectory. Their human metrics are rising faster than their planetary pressures.
Wow.
This is their hidden superpower on the global stage. While the West is spending trillions trying to retroactively green their dirty economies, Morocco is attempting to build a green economy from the ground up.
It's incredibly impressive. But, the data never lets us just celebrate without a reality check. We still have that social ceiling. And to understand the floor beneath that ceiling, we have to talk about poverty.
Right, back to the social reality.
Not just how many dollars a person has, but multidimensional poverty.
Yeah.
Your sources use the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, to give us a granular look at suffering.
The MPI is vital because, much like the inequality adjustment we discussed earlier, it looks beyond just the money in a bank account.
What does it include?
It measures overlapping deprivations that individuals suffer at the exact same time. It looks at lack of access to clean water, malnutrition, lack of electricity, dirt floors, and school attendance. It asks, what is the actual physical experience of being poor in this country?
The sources show that based on data from 2018, only 6.4% of the Moroccan population is living in multidimensional poverty. Now, on the surface, a 6.4% headcount is actually a relatively low number for a developing nation.
It is.
But what I found fascinating in your stack was when the experts broke down what is causing that remaining poverty.
Because the profile of poverty in Morocco has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer primarily a survival problem.
Exactly.
If you look at deprivations in health, things like child mortality and severe malnutrition, those factors only contribute 24.4% to the overall poverty rate. The physical survival metrics, thanks to those healthcare victories we talked about, are relatively stable.
So if it's not a lack of healthcare or food that is driving the poverty for that 6.4%, what is it?
It's the classroom. A massive 46.8% of the multidimensional poverty profile is driven directly by education.
Almost half.
Yes, that 46.8% breaks down into two specific deprivations. Years of schooling accounts for 31.0%, and simple school attendance accounts for 15.8%.
So the people who are poor in Morocco today are poor not because they were starving, but almost entirely because they aren't getting access to or staying in school.
Conclusion. Morocco's poverty problem is intrinsically a poverty of educational opportunity.
Which loops right back to that 41.9% loss in development value caused by educational inequality.
Exactly. And the severe friction that forces kids to drop out at year 6. The system is failing to retain them, failing to equip them with modern skills, and thus locking them into a cycle of multidimensional poverty.
Okay, let's step back. We have put all the puzzle pieces on the table for you. We have the soaring, world-beating health and life expectancy. We have this struggling, unequal education system that is acting as the primary driver of poverty. We have the massive gender abyss, keeping 80% of women out of the workforce, literally cutting the economic engine's potential in half. And we have the impressive green, low-carbon footprint that makes them a hidden ecological champion.
It is an incredibly complex, contradictory profile.
So how does this all look when we place it side by side with the rest of the planet? Let's bring this all together into the ultimate global mirror. Let's look at the 2023 comparative scorecard from your report.
This synthesis is where the diagnosis becomes an action plan.
First, the overall HDI value. Morocco is at 0.710. The world average is 0.756. Conclusion. Morocco is lagging overall. Second, life expectancy. Morocco is at 75.3 years. The world is at 73.4 years. Conclusion. Morocco is actually leading.
Very much so.
Third, expected years of schooling. Morocco is at 15.1 years. The world is at 13 over years. Conclusion. Morocco is leading in expectations.
Even if the reality lags behind.
Fourth, the Gender Inequality Index, measuring health and reproductive safety. Morocco is 0.438. The world is 0.455. Conclusion. Morocco is doing better.
Which is great.
But finally, female labor force participation. Morocco is at a dismal 19.8%, while the world is at 48.5%. Conclusion. Extremely severely lagging.
And there it is. The blueprint for breaking the gender wall is written clearly in those comparisons. The paradox is fully exposed. They have the health, they have the educational infrastructure, they have the green energy.
What they lack is the mobilization of their own people.
Precisely. The report dictates 3 core strategies for Morocco moving forward.
Strategy 1 seems glaringly obvious based on the data. It has to be turning the rest of the factory on.
Absolutely. Strategy 1 is to activate female economic potential. The data makes it undeniably clear. The greatest untapped economic resource in Morocco isn't a new phosphate mine or a new solar farm. It is its women.
Without a doubt.
The government and the private sector must figure out how to translate those 15.1 expected years of schooling into actual labor force participation.
Which means doing the really hard work of dismantling those cultural and structural barriers. It means investing in childcare, creating safe transportation, and incentivizing companies to hire women in non-traditional roles.
Because if they could just move that 19.8% closer to the global average of 48.5%, the economic explosion in Morocco would be unprecedented. It would single-handedly close that gross national income gap.
It would change everything. Strategy 2 flows directly from our discussion on poverty, I assume,
It does. They must shrink educational inequality.
because they cannot afford a 41.9% loss in development value just from unequal access to schools.
Exactly. They have to surgically target the educational sector to close the gap between the 15.1 expected years and the 6.2 actual mean years.
What does that look like in practice?
This means focusing resources heavily on rural education, actively preventing the year 6 dropouts by subsidizing families if necessary, and ensuring that the quality of education actually matches the demands of a modern labor market.
If poverty in Morocco is essentially an education problem, then the solution to poverty is educational equity.
Well said.
And strategy 3. I imagine this is about protecting their hidden superpower.
It is. Strategy 3 is to maintain the low-carbon edge. As Morocco implements strategies 1 and 2, as women enter the workforce, as education improves, as wealth grows, and the HDI inevitably rises, their economy will scale up.
And they will consume more.
Right. The challenge is to aggressively protect their global advantage in low ecological footprints while they experience this massive growth.
Right. They can't let their future economic boom come at the cost of their current environmental stability. They have to prove that you can achieve high human development, cross that 0.8 HDI threshold, while remaining a low-carbon, low-material footprint nation.
If they can pull that off, they won't just be catching up to the developed world, they will be providing a model for the rest of the world to follow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into your datasets, I want you to visualize a map of Morocco in your mind. This map is built on an incredibly strong modern foundation. It is anchored by high life expectancy, surging investments in schooling, and a remarkably green, low-carbon approach to the future.
It's a solid start.
That foundation is rock solid. It's something to be profoundly proud of. But hovering over this entire map is a dark, heavy cloud of inequality, specifically, gender exclusion, and educational disparity.
The ultimate conclusion of this 30-year autopsy is inescapable. Morocco has run the marathon, they have closed the gap, and they have built a beautiful, highly efficient vehicle for the future.
But their future entirely depends on whether they're willing to hand the keys over.
Can they allow the women of the country who represent fully half the population and hold massive idle potential to take the steering wheel as active drivers of the economy rather than forcing them to just ride along as passengers?
We want to thank you for sending us these sources and joining us on this deep dive. We've thrown a tremendous amount of data at you today, but the story it tells is profoundly human.
It really is.
And we want to leave you with this final, somewhat uncomfortable thought to ponder on your own. The data clearly shows that Moroccan women are spending more years in school than ever before in the country's history. They're putting in the work, they're getting educated.
Yeah.
Yet despite those diplomas, fewer than 1 in 5 are entering the workforce. If education alone isn't breaking that glass wall, what invisible cultural, social, or structural forces are actually dictating the rules of their economy? And until society can measure, confront, and change those unseen forces, does a diploma truly equal empowerment?